The rain pounded relentlessly against the grand windows of the Whitmore estate, each droplet sounding like a warning. Inside the sprawling mansion, the atmosphere was no less oppressive. Danny Whitmore's sharp voice echoed through the high-ceilinged hallways, the kind of tone that didn't allow for negotiation. "This family's name is everything," Danny said, her eyes cold and unyielding as they bore into Allie. "You've done your part for the business, Allie, but you're making a mockery of our legacy. Elsa, she's barren. She cannot give you what this family needs." Allie clenched his fists at his sides, his jaw tightening. The weight of Danny's words settled on him like a leaden cloak, heavy and suffocating. Across the room, Elsa stood still, her hands trembling but her head held high. She'd heard those words before, not from Allie, but in hushed whispers from guests at their dinners, in the pitying glances of his mother's friends. Yet hearing it now, so plainly spoken, was like a dagger driven deep. "I married Elsa because I love her," Allie finally said, his voice steady but low. "Not because of what she can or can't give me." Danny's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Love? Love doesn't secure dynasties, Allie. It doesn't ensure the Whitmore name will carry forward. You have responsibilities, ones that she can't fulfill." Elsa took a step forward, her voice soft but resolute. "I may not be able to give you what you want, Mrs. Whitmore," she said, addressing Danny with deliberate precision, "but I gave Ali my trust, my loyalty. Isn't that enough?" "It's not," Danny snapped, her tone slicing through the room. She turned her gaze back to Ali. "You have a choice to make. Continue this charade, or do what's right for this family. The board is already murmuring, Ali. People are asking questions. And when there are questions, there's weakness." The words stung because they carried a thread of truth. Ali had heard the murmurs himself, felt the weight of the board's scrutinizing stares at the last meeting. The Whitmore legacy was more than a name. It was a behemoth of power and influence, one that required constant maintenance. But Elsa's presence, her kindness, her laughter, those were things that no empire could replace. He looked at her now, standing with her shoulders square, even as her hands shook at her sides. She had been his anchor in the storm that was his life. "Ali," Elsa whispered, her voice breaking into his thoughts. "Please, don't let her come between us." His chest tightened as he turned to her. For a fleeting moment, he thought about pushing back, standing up to his mother, declaring his love for Elsa in front of the world. But the images of the board's disapproving stares, the headlines, the whispers, everything Danny had described, swirled in his mind. "I need time," he muttered, stepping back from both women. Elsa's breath hitched, her face falling. "Time?" she echoed, her voice trembling now. "Ali, what do you mean? You promised me." "I said I need time, Elsa," he interrupted, harsher than he'd intended. Danny smirked, knowing she'd won the first round. "Don't drag this out, Ali," she said with a finality that made Elsa's stomach churn. "A clean break is better for everyone involved." Elsa felt her world teeter on the edge of collapse. She had always known Danny's disdain for her, but she'd believed, naively perhaps, that her love for Ali would be enough to withstand it. Now, with his silence, his retreating figure, the doubts she'd buried for years came roaring to the surface. When Danny finally left the room, Elsa stayed rooted in place, staring at the rain-slicked window. The thunder rolled outside, its deep rumble matching the ache in her chest. Ali hadn't chosen yet, but the silence had spoken volumes. The storm outside seemed to seep into the mansion, its chill wrapping around Elsa as she stood alone in the grand parlor. Her reflection in the glass showed someone she barely recognized. Her normally vibrant eyes were dim, her lips pressed tightly together to keep from trembling. She inhaled deeply, willing herself not to cry, If she fell apart now, Danny would win completely. The sound of Ali's footsteps returning echoed through the hall. Elsa turned to face him, her hope fragile but still flickering. His face was pale, his expression torn, but there was no mistaking the defeat in his eyes. "We need to talk," he began, his voice strained. Elsa swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. "Then talk, Ali. Say what's on your mind." Her voice was calm, but the tension in her body betrayed her fear. He couldn't meet her gaze. Instead, he stared down at his hands, his fingers fidgeting with the cufflinks she had given him on their wedding day. "You've always been everything to me," he said softly. "You've stood by me through everything, every late night, every setback." "Then why does it feel like you're about to leave me?" she asked, her tone sharper now, her pain breaking through. Ali flinched but pressed on. "It's not because I want to, Elsa, but this situation, it's tearing everything apart. My family, the business, the future, it's all crumbling under the weight of expectations." "And I'm the weight, is that it?" Elsa asked, her voice rising. Tears prickled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I'm the reason your world is falling apart." "No," Ali said quickly, stepping closer. "That's not what I mean. This is my fault. I should have protected you from them, but—" "Then why are you still letting her dictate our lives?" Elsa demanded, cutting him off. Her voice cracked, but she refused to back down. "I didn't marry your mother, Ali. I married you." Ali's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to stand up to her without losing everything." Elsa stared at him, her heart breaking all over again. "Then you've already lost me," she said quietly. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and irrevocable. Ali's head shot up, panic flashing in his eyes. "Elsa, wait!" "No," she interrupted, her voice steady now. "I won't beg you to stay, Ali. I won't fight to keep a man who's too afraid to fight for me. If you can't stand up to her now, you never will." She turned away, her hands shaking as she grabbed the coat draped over the back of a chair. Ali reached out as if to stop her, but froze, his hand hovering in the air. He wanted to say something, anything to make her stay, but the words caught in his throat. As she reached the door, Elsa paused, her back still to him. "You once told me that love was enough to weather any storm," she said softly. "But storms pass, Ali, and all that's left is the choice to stand together or walk away." With that, she opened the door and stepped into the storm. Rain lashed against her face as thunder rumbled overhead, but she didn't look back. Each step away from the mansion felt like a piece of her heart breaking, but she forced herself to keep going. She had nothing left to hold on to here. Inside, Ali sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. The sound of the rain pounding against the windows filled the silence, a stark reminder of everything he'd just let slip away. As the storm outside began to wane, Danny entered the room, her movements measured and triumphant. "You did the right thing," she said smoothly, pouring herself a glass of wine. "It's better this way. She was never meant to be part of this family." Ali didn't respond. He couldn't. The sound of Danny's heels clicking against the marble floor as she left the room echoed in his ears, but her words barely registered. All he could think about was the sight of Elsa walking away, her silhouette swallowed by the storm, and the unbearable ache in his chest that told him he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Unbeknownst to him, Elsa, now miles away, was already making plans. She wouldn't let this break her, not this time, and in the quiet resolve that grew within her, a flicker of strength began to emerge, one that would carry her through the difficult days ahead. The apartment was small, cramped even, but to Elsa it was a sanctuary. The faded beige walls and creaky floorboards didn't bother her. They felt like a blank slate, a quiet space where she could finally begin again. It had been 2 weeks since she'd left the Whitmore estate, and every day since felt like she was crawling out from under an avalanche. Each breath felt a little easier, each step a little lighter, though the pain in her chest refused to fade entirely. She'd found this place in the heart of Austin, a modest one-bedroom apartment above a local bakery. The rent was reasonable, and the smell of fresh bread wafting through the hallway each morning was a small comfort she didn't realize she needed. Life here was different, quiet, peaceful, but also lonely. Elsa spent most of her days working at a small cafe a few blocks away. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and for the first time in years, she felt in control of her own life. She was no longer Mrs. Whitmore, a title that had once made her proud, but now felt like a chain. Here she was just Elsa Harper, a barista learning to take orders and brew coffee, starting from scratch. "Morning, Elsa," came a familiar voice as she wiped down the counter. It was her manager, Nancy, a cheerful woman in her mid-40s with an infectious smile. "Got a new pastry delivery this morning. Make sure you try the blueberry scones. They're divine." "Will do," Elsa replied, forcing a smile. Nancy was kind, always full of warmth, and though Elsa appreciated her efforts to connect, she wasn't ready to open up. Not yet. The morning rush came and went, the steady stream of customers keeping Elsa's mind occupied. It was easier that way, keeping busy, avoiding the quiet moments where her thoughts wandered back to Ali and everything she'd left behind. But the ache still found its way in, creeping into her chest when she least expected it. By the time her shift ended, the Texas sun was hanging high in the sky, its rays relentless as she stepped out onto the busy sidewalk. She clutched her bag close, weaving through the crowd with practiced ease. Her apartment was only a short walk away, but today her body felt heavier, her energy drained. Halfway home she felt it, a sudden wave of dizziness. Her vision blurred, the edges darkening as the world around her spun. She stumbled, her legs threatening to give way, but before she could hit the ground, a firm hand caught her arm. "Whoa, hey, I've got you," a deep voice said. She blinked, her vision slowly clearing to reveal a man with kind brown eyes and a concerned expression. He crouched slightly, keeping her steady. "Are you okay? You don't look so good." "I'm fine," she mumbled, trying to wave him off, but her body betrayed her. "Fine doesn't usually look like this," he said lightly, his tone warm but firm. "Let's get you sitting down." Elsa had no choice but to let him guide her to a nearby bench. Elsa sat on the bench, trying to catch her breath as the stranger crouched in front of her, his gaze steady but not overbearing. He handed her a bottle of water he had pulled from his bag. "Here," he said. "Small sips. You probably just overheated." She hesitated for a moment but accepted the bottle. The cool water was soothing against her parched throat, and after a few sips, her head began to clear. "Thank you," she said quietly, glancing up at him. Now that the dizziness had passed, she could see him more clearly. He had a calm, approachable demeanor, his shirt slightly wrinkled as if he had rushed out of work. A doctor, maybe. "No problem," he replied, leaning back slightly to give her some space. "I'm Cody Sanders. I work just down the street at the clinic. You probably passed it on your way here." Elsa managed a faint smile. "That explains the water and the steady hands?" Cody chuckled. "Yeah, it comes with the job, but you don't look like you've been taking care of yourself." "Long day?" She nodded, not ready to offer more. "Something like that." His gaze softened, but he didn't press her. "Well, if you're ever feeling off again, come by the clinic. It's nothing fancy, but we can help." He reached into his pocket and handed her a business card. "And don't feel bad. It happens more than you'd think, especially in this heat." Elsa took the card, running her thumb over the embossed letters. "Thanks, Cody. I appreciate it." "Take care, Elsa. he said, rising to his feet with a quick smile. "And don't skip lunch next time." With that, he gave her a casual wave and walked away, blending into the bustling street. As she sat there, Elsa felt a flicker of gratitude for his kindness. It was a small gesture, but after weeks of solitude, it reminded her that not everyone was like Danny, waiting to exploit or manipulate. Maybe this new chapter of her life wouldn't be so lonely after all. When she returned to her apartment, the room felt emptier than usual. She set her bag down and sank into the worn armchair by the window, staring out at the street below. The day's events replayed in her mind. The dizziness, Cody's unexpected help, and the overwhelming realization that her body was no longer just her own. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, and for the first time she allowed herself to fully confront what she'd been avoiding. She was pregnant. The faint signs had been there for days: exhaustion, the waves of nausea she'd tried to dismiss, but now there was no denying it. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of it all. This was a life she hadn't planned for, a responsibility she would face alone. But as the tears fell, a new feeling began to rise within her: determination. She had left Houston to find herself again, to reclaim the pieces Danny and Allie had tried to take from her. This child wasn't a complication. It was her chance to build something real, something no one could take away. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Elsa's resolve had hardened. She wouldn't let fear or regret dictate her choices anymore. For herself, and for the life growing inside her, she would face whatever came next. The apartment felt alive that morning. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the soft pastel curtains Elsa had hung just weeks ago. A faint aroma of coffee mingled with the scent of fresh bread wafting up from the bakery below. But today, something more profound filled the air: anticipation. Elsa glanced at the neatly packed bag by the door as she rested a hand on her round belly. The baby had been growing steadily, a quiet yet constant reminder of the life ahead. She had spent the last few months adjusting to the idea of motherhood, focusing her energy on preparing for the future. She had even allowed herself to dream about what her child might look like, whether the baby would inherit her green eyes or the sharp features she hadn't been able to forget about Allie. The thought made her chest tighten momentarily, but she shook it off. This was her moment. Today was about starting fresh, about welcoming the life she had fought so hard to protect. She pulled on her coat, the brisk autumn air seeping through the cracks in the apartment's walls. A knock at the door startled her. She turned, hesitating for a moment. Visitors were rare, and she hadn't invited anyone over. Slowly, she opened the door to reveal Cody, standing there with a sheepish smile and a bouquet of sunflowers. "You're not supposed to be working today," Elsa said, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I'm not," Cody replied, holding up the flowers like a peace offering. "I just thought you could use these for good luck." Elsa raised an eyebrow. "Good luck? Well, you're headed to the clinic today, right? Big day," he said, stepping inside uninvited but not unwelcome. "I figured sunflowers might brighten it a little." She chuckled, taking the bouquet and inhaling the faint, earthy scent. "You didn't have to, Cody, but thank you." Cody grinned and glanced at the bag by the door. "So, everything's set?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she said. Her voice carried a mix of nervousness and excitement. "I'll find out if it's a boy or a girl today." Cody's grin widened. "Exciting? Do you have a preference?" "No," she said after a pause, "as long as they're healthy." The conversation settled into an easy rhythm, with Cody's steady presence calming her nerves. He had become an anchor of sorts, a friend who never pressed her for more than she was willing to give. Elsa appreciated that about him, especially on days like today, when the weight of the unknown threatened to overwhelm her. "You want me to drive you?" Cody asked casually as he picked up her bag. "You don't have to," Elsa began, but he waved her off. "It's not a problem. Besides, the last thing you need is to worry about parking at the clinic." Before she could protest further, Cody was already heading out the door with her bag in tow, leaving her no choice but to follow. The drive to the clinic was quiet, but comforting. Cody hummed along to the soft country tune playing on the radio, while Elsa stared out the window, her mind racing with questions about the baby. Would she be a good mother? Could she truly give her child everything they deserved? The doubts came in waves, but she pushed them aside, focusing instead on the steady hum of the car engine and Cody's calm presence beside her. When they arrived, Cody pulled into a parking spot and turned off the engine. "Ready?" he asked, his tone light but supportive. Elsa took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender, an odd but oddly soothing combination. The receptionist greeted Elsa warmly, clearly recognizing her from her previous visits. "Good morning, Ms. Harper. Dr. Ellis will see you shortly," she said, handing her a clipboard with a few final forms to fill out. Elsa took a seat, Cody settling into the chair beside her. "You didn't have to come all the way in," she said, glancing at him as she scribbled her name on the form. "I didn't want you sitting here alone," he replied simply. "Besides, I like seeing you smile. You don't do it enough." She rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a faint grin. "Well, don't get used to it." Before long, a nurse called Elsa's name, leading her back to an exam room. Cody stayed in the waiting area, giving her a thumbs up as she walked away. The ultrasound room was dimly lit, the soft hum of machinery filling the space. Elsa lay back on the examination table, her hands resting nervously on her stomach. Dr. Ellis entered with a kind smile. "Good morning, Elsa. How are we feeling today?" "Excited mostly," she admitted, "and a little nervous." "That's perfectly normal, Doctor," Ellis said reassuringly as she prepped the machine. "Let's take a look at this little one and see how everything's coming along." The cold gel on her stomach made Elsa flinch, but she quickly relaxed as the image on the screen flickered to life. At first, it was a blur of shapes and shadows, but then the baby came into view, a tiny, unmistakable silhouette. Tears sprang to her eyes as she watched the screen, her heart swelling with a mix of awe and love. "There's your baby," Dr. Ellis said, her tone warm, "and everything looks healthy. Strong heartbeat, good growth. Would you like to know the gender?" Elsa hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, please." Dr. Ellis smiled. "It's a boy." A laugh escaped Elsa's lips, followed by a few tears. "A boy," she repeated softly, the words sinking in. Her mind raced with possibilities for his future. What kind of life she could give him, what kind of mother she would be. After the appointment, Elsa walked back into the waiting area, clutching a small ultrasound photo. Cody stood as soon as he saw her, his expression questioning but hopeful. "Well?" he asked. Elsa held up the photo, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "It's a boy." Cody grinned. "That's amazing, Elsa. Congratulations." The drive home was lighter, filled with quiet laughter and Cody's gentle teasing about baby names. For the first time in months, Elsa felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. As the apartment came into view, she looked down at the ultrasound photo in her hand, her heart brimming with determination. This child was her reason to keep fighting, to keep building a life she could be proud of. As she stepped back into her apartment, Elsa placed the photo carefully on the small wooden shelf above her bed. Her future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. She wasn't running anymore. She was ready to face whatever came next. The Whitmore estate stood as it always had, grand and imposing, a monument to wealth and legacy. But for Ali, it felt emptier with each passing day. The corridors, once filled with purpose and ambition, now echoed with the heavy silence of regret. He had spent the past few months throwing himself into work, as though burying himself in the endless demands of the family business could drown out the nagging voice in his head. Ali sat in his office, the large mahogany desk cluttered with reports and contracts. The numbers were good, even excellent, but they brought him no satisfaction. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, his mind drifting to Elsa. He wondered where she was, how she was doing. Did she hate him? Did she still think about him at all? Ali! Danny's voice cut through his thoughts as she entered the room unannounced. She moved with the kind of confidence that came from years of being obeyed without question. "I've just spoken with the board. They're pleased with the quarterly results. That expansion project in Dallas is making waves." "That's good," Ali replied flatly, not looking at her. Danny frowned, sensing his disinterest. She approached the desk, placing her perfectly manicured hands on its surface. "Ali, you've been distracted lately. That's not like you. What's going on?" "Nothing," he lied, his tone clipped. Her eyes narrowed, studying him. "This isn't about her, is it?" Danny's voice took on a harder edge, the softness disappearing entirely. Ali's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Danny sighed, her frustration palpable. "I thought we agreed, Ali. You made the right choice. For the family, for the business. Elsa didn't belong here. She couldn't give you what you needed." "Maybe she didn't belong here?" Ali said quietly, his voice laced with bitterness. "But she gave me something none of this ever has. Peace." The words hung in the air, a rare moment of defiance that caught Danny off guard. She straightened, her expression hardening. "Peace doesn't secure legacies, Ali. Strength does. Focus does. And you need to remember where your priorities lie." Ali turned his chair away from her, staring out the window at the perfectly manicured lawns below. "I don't need a lecture, Mother," he said coldly. "Not right now." Danny hesitated, then stepped back, her tone softening slightly. "You're the head of this family, Ali. Don't forget what that means." As Danny left the room, Ali felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. He ran a hand through his hair, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had spent his entire life trying to live up to her expectations, to be the man she wanted him to be. But now all he could think about was the man he had lost, someone who had once dreamed of building a life with Elsa, free from the chains of legacy and obligation. That evening, Ali wandered through the estate's gardens, seeking solace in the cool night air. The moonlight bathed the meticulously trimmed hedges and fountains in a silvery glow, but its beauty offered little comfort. He paused near the rose garden, a place Elsa had loved. She had spent countless afternoons here, tending to the blooms, despite Danny's pointed remarks about how a Whitmore should leave such tasks to the staff. Elsa had always smiled in response, her hands brushing over the petals as she said, "These roses deserve more than just admiration. They deserve care." Ali knelt beside the bushes, brushing his fingers over a wilted rose that had escaped the gardener's notice. It felt symbolic somehow, something beautiful and resilient left to wither in the shadows. He couldn't stop the memory of Elsa's laughter from surfacing, the sound echoing in his mind like a haunting melody. He stood abruptly, unable to bear the memories any longer, and made his way back toward the house. But as he approached, the faint glow of the sitting-room lights caught his attention. Danny was inside, speaking with someone. Curious, Ali stopped short, his ears straining to catch their conversation. "His performance is slipping," Danny said, her voice sharp but controlled. He's distracted, and that's dangerous for someone in his position. He's still delivering results, came another voice, Victoria's. The board isn't complaining. What's the real problem? The problem, Danny replied coolly, is that Ali's fixation on that woman is clouding his judgment. Elsa may be gone, but her shadow lingers. We cannot afford for him to fall into old habits. Ali's stomach churned as he listened. He clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. How long had Danny been monitoring him like this, pulling strings behind the scenes? It was bad enough that she had pushed Elsa out of his life. Now she was using her memory as leverage to keep him in line. He turned and walked back to his office, his mind racing. The weight of his choices bore down on him with every step. Elsa was gone, and that was on him. But the life Danny had mapped out for him, the legacy she had drilled into him since he was a boy, it all felt hollow now. He needed clarity, and he knew he wouldn't find it within these walls. Sitting at his desk, Ali opened his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he typed her name into the search bar. Elsa Harper. The screen filled with results, most of them irrelevant. Old social media profiles, random mentions in articles. But then he saw something. A small cafe in Austin listed Elsa as an employee. His heart skipped a beat. He clicked on the link, his pulse quickening. The page showed a photo of the cafe, its cozy interior inviting and unpretentious. He could almost picture her there, greeting customers with that warm smile that had always drawn him in. The thought made his chest ache with longing. Ali leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe he could find her, explain himself, try to make things right. The fear of rejection lingered, but it was outweighed by something stronger: determination. By the time the sun began to rise, Ali had made up his mind. He couldn't change the past, but he could fight for a future. And that fight began in Austin. The drive to Austin felt endless, even though Ali had made the trip in record time. The highway stretched out before him, the scenery blurring past as his thoughts churned. What was he even going to say to her? Months had passed, and the chances that Elsa wanted to see him were slim. But he couldn't shake the pull, the nagging voice telling him he had to try. When he finally pulled into the city, the change in atmosphere was palpable. Austin's streets buzzed with life. Musicians played on corners and the scent of barbecue wafted through the air. It was a stark contrast to the quiet, controlled world of the Whitmore estate. Ali navigated the unfamiliar streets, glancing at the cafe's address on his phone. The closer he got, the tighter his chest felt. When he finally arrived, he parked across the street and sat for a moment, staring at the unassuming building. The cafe was quaint, its exterior painted in soft blues and yellows. A chalkboard sign outside advertised the day's specials, and through the window he could see a handful of customers chatting over steaming cups of coffee. Ali's gaze shifted to the counter, where he saw her. Elsa. She was laughing at something a customer had said, her smile lighting up her face in a way that made his heart ache. She looked different, stronger, more confident, but just as beautiful as he remembered. For a moment he considered turning around and leaving. What right did he have to disrupt her life again? But then he saw her step away from the counter, rubbing her lower back as she moved toward a table with a cleaning rag. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and that's when he noticed. The curve of her stomach was unmistakable. Ali froze, his breath catching in his throat. His mind raced, piecing together the implications. She was pregnant. The realization hit him like a freight train, and before he could stop himself, he opened the car door and stepped onto the sidewalk. He didn't even remember crossing the street, but suddenly he was at the door, pushing it open. The bell above the frame jingled, drawing a few curious glances from the patrons inside. Elsa didn't notice him at first, too focused on wiping down the table. It wasn't until he said her name that she turned, her eyes widening in shock. "Ali?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the cafe. For a moment, neither of them moved. Her expression was a mixture of disbelief and something else he couldn't quite place. Anger, maybe, or hurt. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. How did you start a conversation like this? What could he possibly say that would make up for what he had done? Elsa straightened, the cleaning rag slipping from her hand onto the table. Her initial shock quickly gave way to a steely glare. "What are you doing here, Ali?" she asked, her tone sharp and clipped. Ali hesitated, his mind scrambling for the right words. I needed to see you," he said finally. "I know I have no right to just show up like this, but "No, you don't," Elsa interrupted, her voice low but firm. She glanced around, aware of the curious stares from the cafe's patrons. "Not here. I'm working." Ali nodded quickly. "I'll wait," he said, stepping back toward the door. "You'll wait a long time," she shot back, grabbing the rag from the table and walking behind the counter. Ali stood frozen for a moment before deciding to take a seat at a corner table, out of the way. His hands fidgeted with his phone, the reality of her anger sinking in. He deserved this. He knew that. But he wasn't leaving until she gave him a chance to explain. The next 30 minutes felt like hours. Elsa moved around the cafe with practiced ease, refilling coffee cups and taking orders. But every so often, her gaze flicked toward Ali, a mixture of frustration and unease in her eyes. He tried not to stare, but it was impossible not to notice the life she had built here, a life that seemed far removed from the one they had shared. When the last customer left, Elsa flipped the sign on the door to closed and locked it with a sharp twist of the key. She turned to face him, crossing her arms over her chest. "Talk," she said, her voice cold. Ali rose slowly, unsure how to start. "Elsa, I've been thinking about you, about us. Every day since you left, I've regretted—" "Don't," she cut him off, her eyes narrowing. "Don't stand here and tell me you regret it, Ali. You made your choice. You chose her, your family, your legacy, all of it over me." His chest tightened. "I know I made a mistake. I know I hurt you, but I want to make it right." Elsa laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "Make it right? Ali, there is no making it right. You let me walk away. You stood there and let your mother tear us apart." "I was a coward," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I should have fought for you, for us. But I'm here now, Elsa. I want to fight now." Her jaw clenched, and she stepped closer, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's too late for that, Ali. You don't get to walk back into my life and act like everything's fine." He swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to her stomach. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "About the baby." Elsa froze, her arms falling to her sides. "And what?" "You think that changes things?" she asked, her voice cracking. "You think that gives you a free pass?" "No," he said quickly. "It doesn't. But I want to be there. For you. For him." Her breath hitched. "I don't need you, Ali. I've been doing this on my own, and I'll keep doing it on my own." Ali took a step closer, his voice filled with quiet determination. "You're strong, Elsa. I see that. But you don't have to do it alone. Please, just give me a chance." Elsa stared at him, her emotions warring behind her eyes. For a moment, it looked like she might relent, but then she shook her head. "I can't do this right now," she said, turning away. "You need to leave." "Elsa, leave, Ali," she repeated, her voice firm. "I need time." The words stung, but he nodded, realizing he couldn't push her. "I'll go," he said softly, "but I'm not giving up." She didn't respond, her back still turned as he walked out the door. The bell jingled behind him, the sound echoing in the quiet cafe. Outside, Ali took a deep breath, staring up at the sky. He wasn't sure how, but he was determined to prove to her that he was worth trusting again. Inside, Elsa leaned against the counter, her hand resting on her stomach. She closed her eyes, her mind racing with memories and emotions she thought she had buried. Ali's sudden reappearance had thrown her carefully rebuilt life into chaos, and for the first time in months, she felt unsteady. But one thing was clear: whatever came next, she wouldn't let him dictate her life again. Here is the first 500 words of Chapter 6. The cafe was quieter than usual that morning, the hum of conversations replaced by the soft clinking of cups and the hiss of the espresso machine. Elsa moved behind the counter with measured precision, her mind replaying the events of the past week like a broken record. Ali's sudden reappearance had unsettled her in ways she hadn't expected, and no matter how hard she tried to focus on work, her thoughts kept circling back to him. She hadn't told Cody about the encounter. It wasn't because she wanted to hide it, but because she didn't have the energy to explain everything. How could she put into words the storm of emotions Ali had stirred up? The hurt, the anger, the faint flicker of something she didn't dare call hope. All of it tangled together, leaving her feeling raw and exposed. The sound of the door chime pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up, half expecting to see Ali standing there again, but it was just Cody, his familiar smile warming the space. He carried a small bouquet of daisies, their bright yellow centers standing out against the cool grey of his sweater. "Morning," he said, setting the flowers on the counter. "I figured you could use a little sunshine." Elsa couldn't help but smile. "You really don't have to keep doing this, you know." "I know," he replied, leaning against the counter. "But I like seeing you smile, and you've looked like you could use one lately." She busied herself with arranging the daisies in a glass vase, her movements slower than usual. "It's just been a lot," she admitted after a pause. "Work, the baby, everything." Cody watched her carefully, sensing there was more she wasn't saying. "You know you don't have to do it alone, right?" he said gently. "I'm here for you, Elsa. Whatever you need." Her hands stilled, and she looked up at him, her eyes betraying her exhaustion. "I know," she said softly. "You've already done so much, Cody. I don't even know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he said with a shrug. "That's what friends are for." His gaze flicked to her stomach briefly before meeting her eyes again. "Besides, this little guy deserves all the support he can get." The warmth in his words eased some of the tension Elsa hadn't realized she was holding. She reached across the counter, placing a hand over his. "Thank you," she said sincerely. The moment was interrupted by the door chime again, and Elsa's heart sank as Ali walked in. He hesitated at the entrance, his eyes quickly scanning the room before landing on Elsa. The tension was immediate, palpable, and Cody straightened, his smile fading as he caught Elsa's expression. "Elsa," Ali said, his voice calm but determined. "Can we talk?" Cody's protective instincts kicked in. "She's working," he said firmly, stepping slightly in front of Elsa. "It's okay," Elsa said quickly, her voice steady. She placed a hand on Cody's arm, signaling for him to stand down. "I'll handle this." Cody hesitated, his eyes darting between Elsa and Ali, but eventually nodded. "I'll be over there if you need me," he said, his voice laced with warning as he pointed to a table near the back of the cafe. With one last glance at Ali, he stepped away, leaving the two of them standing awkwardly by the counter. Elsa crossed her arms, keeping her posture firm. "What do you want, Ali?" she asked, her tone clipped. Ali shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, his usual confidence faltering. "I wanted to apologize," he began, his voice quieter than she expected. "For showing up like that the other day, I should have respected your space." "That's not the only thing you should be apologizing for," Elsa shot back, her anger bubbling to the surface. "You're right," he admitted, his shoulders sagging slightly. "I've made so many mistakes, Elsa, but I'm trying to make up for them. I know it'll take time, but I'm here now." "Here for what?" she demanded, her voice rising slightly. "You can't just walk back into my life and expect everything to fall into place. That's not how this works." Ali swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the floor before meeting hers again. "I know I can't fix what I've done, but I want to be a part of this, of his life." His eyes flicked briefly to her stomach, and Elsa felt her heart tighten despite herself. "And what about when it gets hard, Ali?" she challenged. "When Danny finds out, when your perfect little world gets messy, are you going to run again?" "No," he said firmly, his voice steady. "I'm not running anymore, Elsa. I'm not proud of who I was back then, but I'm trying to be better. For him. For you." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, Elsa felt the tiniest crack in the wall she had built around herself. But the wounds were still too fresh, the betrayal too deep. "Being better starts with actions, not words," she said, her tone softening slightly but still guarded. "If you're serious about this, then prove it. Show me that you mean it. Otherwise, stay out of our lives." Ali nodded, his jaw tightening with resolve. "I will. I'll prove it to you." Elsa exhaled sharply, her energy drained from the confrontation. She glanced toward Cody, who was watching them closely from his table. "I have work to do," she said, turning away. "Don't make a scene, Ali." "I won't," he replied, stepping back. "But I'm not giving up, Elsa. Not this time." She didn't respond, her focus already shifting back to cleaning the counter, but her hands trembled slightly. Ali lingered for a moment longer, then walked out, the bell above the door jingling as he left. Cody immediately approached, concern etched across his face. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. "I'm fine," Elsa replied, though her expression told a different story. She busied herself with arranging cups, refusing to meet his gaze. Cody hesitated before placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone, you know," he said quietly. "I'm here, no matter what happens." Elsa gave him a small, grateful smile, but her mind was elsewhere, torn between the life she had rebuilt and the part of her past that refused to stay buried. As the day wore on, she couldn't shake Ali's words. He was determined, and for the first time, she wondered if he might actually mean it. But whether she was ready to let him in again, that was a question she wasn't sure she could answer yet. The Whitmore estate was eerily quiet, the stillness broken only by the soft rustling of papers in Danny's study. She sat at her oversized desk, her posture stiff and commanding as always. A faint scowl tugged at her lips as she reviewed the report in front of her, a summary from the investigator she'd hired. The details were sparse, but they were enough. Elsa Harper, now living in Austin, employed at a modest cafe, and very much pregnant. Danny leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled under her chin as she considered her next move. This was a complication she hadn't anticipated, but it wasn't insurmountable. If anything, it reaffirmed her belief that Elsa was a threat to the Whitmore legacy. A child, her grandchild no less, being raised outside the family's influence was unacceptable. She picked up her phone and dialed quickly. "James," she said when the line connected, her voice sharp. "Prepare the legal documents. I want full custody proceedings initiated immediately." "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore," came the smooth reply. "On what grounds?" Danny's lips curved into a faint smile. "On the grounds that she's unfit to raise a Whitmore. She's alone, financially unstable, and without proper support. That child belongs here, under our care." After hanging up, Danny allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She would handle this swiftly and efficiently, as she did everything. Elsa wouldn't stand a chance. Danny had resources, connections, and the law on her side. It was only a matter of time before the child was where he belonged. Later that afternoon, Danny made her way to Austin, her car gliding smoothly down the highway. She hadn't planned to confront Elsa directly, but something in her gut told her it was necessary. She needed to see the girl, to remind her of the power she was up against. The cafe was small and unassuming, a far cry from the opulence Danny was used to. She wrinkled her nose at the faint smell of coffee and baked goods as she stepped inside. Elsa was behind the counter, chatting with a customer. For a moment, Danny observed her, noting the calm confidence in her demeanor. It was clear Elsa had changed, but Danny dismissed it as a facade, one that would crumble under pressure. When the cafe emptied out, Danny approached the counter, her heels clicking against the floor with precision. Elsa glanced up, her expression instantly guarded when she saw who it was. "Mrs. Whitmore," Elsa said coolly, her hands stilling on the counter. "What are you doing here?" Danny's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I thought it was time we had a little chat." Elsa crossed her arms, leaning slightly forward. "We have nothing to talk about." "On the contrary," Danny said smoothly, her voice like silk. "We have everything to talk about, starting with that child you're carrying." Elsa stiffened, her grip on the counter tightening. "That child," she said evenly, "is none of your business." Danny's smile didn't falter, but her tone hardened. "Let's not pretend, Elsa. That child is a Whitmore, whether you like it or not, and that makes it very much my business." Elsa took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. "You've already done enough to destroy my life once. What more could you possibly want?" "To fix what you've broken," Danny replied, her words as sharp as glass. "You've dragged Ali into this mess, and now you're raising his child in a cafe. Be reasonable, Elsa. You can't possibly give him the life he deserves." Elsa's jaw clenched, but she refused to back down. "I'm giving him a life filled with love, not control and manipulation. He doesn't need your money or your influence." Danny stepped closer, her imposing presence casting a shadow over Elsa. "Love doesn't pay bills. It doesn't secure futures. That child deserves to grow up with opportunities, not struggling in your little apartment." "I'm doing just fine," Elsa snapped, her voice rising, "and I'll keep doing fine without your interference." "Don't be naive," Danny shot back. "Do you really think you can protect him from everything? From everyone? The world isn't as kind as you think, Elsa, and when the time comes, you'll realize that." "Is that a threat?" Elsa asked, her eyes narrowing. "It's a reality check," Danny said coldly. "But I'll make this simple. You can save yourself a lot of trouble by agreeing to what I'm offering." "And what exactly are you offering?" Elsa asked, her tone dripping with skepticism. "Financial security, access to the best education, healthcare, and opportunities money can buy," Danny said smoothly. "In return, you'll allow the Whitmore family to raise him properly. You'll still see him, of course, under appropriate terms." Elsa let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You think I'd hand over my child to you? After everything you've done?" "Think carefully, Elsa," Danny warned, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You can fight me, but you won't win. I have the means, the connections, and the law on my side, and when I take this to court, it won't matter how much you love him. All they'll see is a struggling single mother who can't compete with what I can provide." For a moment, Elsa said nothing, the weight of Danny's words pressing down on her. But then she straightened, meeting Danny's gaze with unwavering defiance. "You can try, Danny," she said softly, her voice steady. "But I won't let you take him. Not now. Not ever." Danny's expression hardened, but she didn't reply. Instead, she turned sharply on her heel, her heels clicking against the floor as she walked out. "We'll see," she said over her shoulder, her tone icy. "You'll hear from my lawyer." As the door slammed shut behind her, Elsa leaned against the counter, her hands shaking. The encounter had left her rattled, but her resolve was stronger than ever. She glanced toward the back of the cafe, where Cody had been watching from a distance, his concern evident. "Are you okay?" he asked, stepping forward. Elsa nodded, her expression fierce. "She's not taking my son, Cody. I'll fight her with everything I have." Cody placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "And I'll be right there with you." Elsa gave him a small, grateful smile, but her mind was already racing. Danny had just declared war, and Elsa knew she needed to prepare for the battle of her life. The courtroom was colder than Elsa had expected, both in temperature and atmosphere. The high ceilings and stark walls loomed over her, amplifying the weight of what was at stake. She sat at the defendant's table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Across from her, Danny Whitmore sat poised and composed, the picture of confidence. Her lawyer shuffled through a stack of neatly prepared documents, while Danny's sharp gaze occasionally flicked toward Elsa, a smirk curling at the corners of her lips. Cody sat beside Elsa, his steady presence a quiet comfort amidst the chaos. He wasn't a lawyer, but he had insisted on being here. "You don't have to do this alone," he had told her, and for that she was grateful. On her other side was her attorney, a kind but firm woman named Julia Martinez, who had been recommended by a local advocacy group. Julia was experienced in family law and had taken Elsa's case with fierce determination. As the judge entered, the room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Danny's lawyer, an impeccably dressed man with a crisp accent, was the first to speak. He launched into a meticulously crafted argument, painting Danny as the benevolent grandmother simply seeking the best for her grandchild. He cited Elsa's financial struggles, her lack of family support, and the instability of raising a child while working long hours at a cafe. Elsa clenched her fists under the table, biting back the urge to interrupt. Every word felt like a dagger, an attack on the life she had worked so hard to rebuild. But she knew better than to let her emotions take over. Julia had warned her to stay calm, to let the facts speak for themselves. When it was Julia's turn, she stood with quiet confidence. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady, "my client, Elsa Harper, has dedicated her life to providing a safe, loving environment for her child. She may not have the wealth of the Whitmore family, but what she lacks in money, she more than makes up for in devotion and resilience. This case is not about what's best for the child, it's about control. Mrs. Whitmore is not seeking custody out of love, but out of a desire to maintain her family's image." The judge nodded thoughtfully, his expression unreadable as Julia presented evidence. Elsa's consistent work record, testimonials from her employer and neighbors, and even a letter from Cody vouching for her character and parenting abilities. Still, the tension in the room was palpable, each argument met with scrutiny. As the first recess was called, Elsa exhaled deeply, her body trembling from the stress. Cody placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're doing great," he said softly. "Don't let her get to you." "I'm trying," Elsa whispered, her voice barely audible. "But she's playing a game I don't know how to win." After the recess, the tension in the courtroom grew even thicker. Danny's lawyer called her to the stand where she confidently took her seat. Her demeanor was cool and collected, as if she were in complete control of the situation. "Mrs. Whitmore," her lawyer began, his tone calculated and respectful, "can you explain to the court why you feel it is in the best interest of the child to be raised under your care?" Danny folded her hands neatly in her lap. "Of course," she said. her voice smooth. "This is not about taking anything away from Miss Harper. I simply want to ensure my grandson has every opportunity he deserves. With my family's resources, he would have access to the best education, the best health care, and a stable home environment. Miss Harper, while I admire her determination, is struggling. She works long hours, lives in a modest apartment, and has no family support." Elsa's hands clenched into fists under the table, her knuckles white. Every word from Danny felt like a veiled insult, a deliberate attempt to paint her as inadequate. "And what about your relationship with your son, Mr. Ali Whitmore?" the lawyer pressed. "How does he factor into your plans for the child?" Danny's smile tightened slightly. "Ali is a devoted member of our family. He has always prioritized the Whitmore legacy, and I believe he will step into his role as a father with the guidance and support of our family." At those words, Ali's gaze shot up from where he sat in the gallery. He had been silent throughout the proceedings, his presence a source of confusion and tension for Elsa. But now his jaw tightened, and for the first time, Elsa saw a flicker of defiance in his eyes. When it was Julia's turn to cross-examine Danny, she approached the stand with a calm determination. "Mrs. Whitmore," she began, "you've spoken extensively about the material advantages you can provide. But can you tell the court how often you've spent time with Miss Harper's child since his birth?" Danny's composure faltered slightly. "I haven't," she admitted. "But that's because Miss Harper has deliberately excluded me from his life." Julia nodded, her expression neutral. "And in your interactions with Miss Harper before this case, would you say your relationship with her was amicable?" Danny hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "I wouldn't say amicable, no. We had differences." "Differences," Julia repeated, her voice sharpening. "So, you're admitting that your history with Miss Harper is less about the child's well-being and more about personal grievances?" Danny's jaw tightened. "I'm simply trying to protect my grandson." "Protect him," Julia said, leaning in slightly. "Or control him, just as you've tried to control your son?" Danny's face reddened, and a murmur rippled through the courtroom. Julia turned to the judge, her voice steady. "Your Honor, this case isn't about what's best for the child. It's about a grandmother who can't accept that her son made choices she didn't agree with." The judge called for order, but the damage had been done. Danny's calm facade had cracked, revealing the true motivations behind her actions. As the session ended for the day, Elsa felt a spark of hope for the first time. Outside the courtroom, Ali caught up to Elsa as she headed toward the parking lot. "Elsa," he called, his voice urgent. She stopped, turning to face him. "What do you want, Ali?" she asked, exhaustion clear in her tone. "I want to help," he said, his expression earnest. "I didn't know she was going to do this. I swear, I didn't." "Then stop her," Elsa replied, her voice sharp. "If you really want to prove that you've changed, show me. Stand up to her." Ali's gaze hardened with determination. "I will," he said. "I promise." As Elsa watched him walk away, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her mind. For all his faults, Ali's sincerity seemed real. But whether or not he could actually stand against Danny was a question that remained unanswered. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the proceedings resumed. Elsa sat at her table, her hands tightly clasped in front of her. Across the room, Danny maintained her polished, unflappable demeanor, but there was a slight edge to her posture that hadn't been there before. Julia had struck a nerve during the last session, and it was clear Danny wasn't used to being put on the defensive. As the judge called the court to order, Danny's lawyer rose again, this time calling Ali to the stand. Elsa's heart sank. She hadn't expected this, and judging by the flicker of surprise on Ali's face, neither had he. Still, he stood and made his way to the witness chair, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Whitmore," Danny's lawyer began, adjusting his tie as he addressed Ali. "You've heard the arguments presented so far. Would you agree with your mother's position that your child would be better off raised within the Whitmore family?" Ali hesitated, his eyes flicking toward Elsa. For a moment he seemed caught between the weight of expectation and the truth he knew he needed to speak. "I think my mother means well," he said finally, his voice measured. "But I don't believe this case is about what's best for my son." Danny's lawyer raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. "Could you elaborate, Mr. Whitmore?" Ali took a deep breath. "This case isn't about Gavin's well-being. It's about control. My mother has spent her entire life managing the Whitmore name, ensuring it stands above everything else. But that's not what Gavin needs. He doesn't need a legacy. He needs a parent who loves him unconditionally." A murmur rippled through the courtroom, and Danny's carefully constructed mask faltered for a brief moment. Her lawyer quickly recovered, pressing further. "Mr. Whitmore, are you suggesting that your mother's intentions are not in your child's best interest?" "I'm suggesting," Ali replied, his tone growing firmer, "that Elsa is the best person to raise Gavin. She's strong, determined, and everything a parent should be. She's already done more for him than I ever have, and I trust her completely." Elsa's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. Ali standing up for her, for their son, in front of his mother and the entire court. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, and for the first time she saw the man he was trying to become. The lawyer pressed on, but Ali remained steadfast, refusing to waver. Each question was met with calm, resolute answers that painted a clear picture. Danny's case was built on manipulation, not genuine concern for Gavin's future. When Ali stepped down, Danny's expression was icy, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The judge called for a brief recess, and as the room emptied, Ali approached Elsa cautiously. Elsa watched Ali approach, her emotions a whirlwind of surprise, gratitude, and lingering skepticism. She stood as he neared, unsure what to say, but Ali spoke first. "I meant every word up there," he said quietly, his voice steady. "I know I've let you down, Elsa, but I'm not going to let her take this from you. From us." She crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "You're saying all the right things, Ali, but words aren't enough. You've said this before, remember?" "I know," he admitted, his eyes meeting hers with unflinching resolve. "That's why I'm doing more than just talking. I've already contacted my own lawyer. I'm going to testify against her, help make sure this case falls apart." Elsa's eyes widened. "You're going to stand against your mother? Publicly?" "Yes," he said firmly. "She's controlled my life for too long, and I won't let her do the same to Gavin. He deserves better." For a moment Elsa didn't respond, her mind racing. Ali's sincerity seemed genuine, but the scars of his past choices ran deep. Could she trust him to follow through, to truly stand by her when it mattered most? "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice soft. "It's just hard to believe." "You don't have to believe me yet," Ali replied, "but I'll prove it to you. Whatever it takes." Before she could respond, Julia approached, a determined look on her face. "Elsa, we need to regroup before the next session. There's still work to do." Elsa nodded, glancing back at Ali. "We'll see," she said, her tone leaving the door open but cautious. "I hope you mean it, Ali." "I do," he said simply, stepping back to let her go. As he watched her walk away, a flicker of hope ignited in his chest. He wasn't sure if he could ever fully make up for the past, but he was determined to try. The courtroom reconvened after the recess, the tension even higher than before. Julia called her next witness, Cody. Elsa's heart raced as he stepped to the stand, his calm and collected demeanor a stark contrast to Danny's earlier fire. Mr. Sanders, Julia began, how would you describe Miss Harper as a parent? Dedicated, Cody replied without hesitation. She works harder than anyone I know to make sure Gavin has everything he needs. She's smart, resourceful, and, above all, she loves that boy more than anything. And have you personally witnessed her care for Gavin? Julia asked. Every day, Cody said. I've seen her sacrifice her own comfort, her own peace, to make sure he's safe and happy. Gavin is lucky to have her. Danny's lawyer attempted to discredit Cody, pointing out that he was emotionally involved with Elsa. But Cody's unwavering responses only solidified Elsa's case, painting her as a capable and loving mother. As the session came to an end, the judge announced that he would deliver his decision the following week. Elsa exhaled deeply, the weight of the day settling over her. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time she felt like she had a fighting chance. The morning of the judge's decision was eerily calm. The soft hum of conversations echoed in the courtroom, but Elsa could barely hear them over the pounding of her heart. She sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly together, her knuckles white. Julia was beside her, flipping through her notes one last time, while Cody sat directly behind her, his steady presence an anchor in the storm of her thoughts. Ali entered moments later, his presence drawing several curious glances. He met Elsa's gaze briefly, giving her a small nod, before taking his seat. Across the room, Danny sat with her lawyer, her expression unreadable, but her posture rigid, as though bracing for a fight. The bailiff called the court to order, and the judge entered, his expression as neutral as ever. He took his seat and shuffled a few papers before looking up. "Before I deliver my ruling," he began, his voice measured, "I want to acknowledge the gravity of this case. Custody disputes are never simple, and they require careful consideration of all parties involved." Elsa's breath caught in her throat, her entire body tense as she waited for the next words. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, every eye on the judge. "Having reviewed the evidence, the testimonies, and the arguments presented," the judge continued, "it is my decision that the child, Gavin Harper, shall remain in the custody of his mother, Elsa Harper." For a moment, Elsa couldn't process the words. They hung in the air like a distant echo, her mind struggling to catch up. Then Julia's hand squeezed her arm, and the room came rushing back into focus. "You did it, Elsa," Julia whispered, her voice filled with quiet pride. Tears welled in Elsa's eyes as relief flooded through her. She turned to Cody, who gave her a wide, genuine smile. "I told you," he said softly. "You've got this." Across the room, Danny's face hardened, her composure cracking for the first time. Her lawyer leaned in to speak to her, but she waved him off, her jaw tight with frustration. Ali, however, looked almost relieved. He met Elsa's gaze again, his expression apologetic but steady. The judge continued, his tone firm. "While custody remains with Ms. Harper, I encourage both parties to work collaboratively for the child's well-being. Mr. Whitmore, as the father, retains visitation rights, provided arrangements are made respectfully and with the child's best interest in mind." Elsa nodded slowly, her emotions a mixture of triumph and uncertainty. She had won, but she knew this wasn't the end. Danny wouldn't give up easily, and the challenge of co-parenting with Ali loomed ahead. But for now, Gavin was safe, and that was all that mattered. As the court adjourned, Elsa stood, the weight she had been carrying for months finally lifting. She felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see Julia, her expression a mix of professionalism and warmth. "You did well, Elsa," Julia said. "This isn't just a win for you. It's a win for Gavin." "Thank you, Julia," Elsa replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you." Cody stepped forward, his grin infectious. "And without me, of course," he added teasingly, though his tone was soft. You're incredible, Elsa. Gavin's lucky to have you. Her lips trembled as she smiled. Thank you, Cody, for everything. But as the crowd began to filter out of the courtroom, Elsa's gaze landed on Ali. He lingered near the doorway, his expression conflicted. For a moment she hesitated, unsure if she should approach him. But something in his posture, the way his shoulders sagged, the way his eyes carried an unfamiliar weight, pushed her to move. Ali, she called gently, her voice cutting through the low murmur of voices. He turned, his eyes meeting hers. Elsa, he said, his tone subdued but sincere. Can we talk? Cody, ever perceptive, gave Elsa a small nod. I'll wait for you outside, he said, stepping back to give them space. Elsa approached Ali cautiously, folding her arms as she stopped in front of him. You surprised me today, she admitted. I wasn't expecting you to stand up for me. For Gavin, Ali nodded, his gaze steady. I meant every word, Elsa. I've let you down more times than I can count, but I want to change that. I want to be there for him, and for you, if you'll let me. Her heart clenched at his words. There was a time when she would have given anything to hear him say that. But now, after everything, she wasn't sure if it was enough. I appreciate what you said in court, she began carefully. And I believe you're trying, Ali. But I can't just forget everything that's happened. Trust isn't something that comes back overnight. I know, he said quietly, and I'm not asking for that. All I'm asking for is a chance to prove myself, to prove that I can be the father Gavin deserves. Elsa studied him for a long moment, searching for any hint of insincerity. But all she saw was a man who, for the first time, seemed truly willing to take responsibility. All right, she said finally, her voice steady. We'll take it one step at a time. Gavin comes first, always. Ali's relief was evident, his shoulders relaxing as he nodded. Thank you, Elsa. That's all I could ask for. She gave him a small, tentative smile before turning to leave. As she stepped outside, the crisp air hit her, and she spotted Cody waiting near the steps. He waved, his grin as steady as ever. Ready to go? He asked, his voice light but supportive. Yeah, Elsa replied, glancing back at the courthouse one last time. Let's go home. The day had been long and exhausting, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Elsa felt a sense of peace. The battle with Danny wasn't over, but she was no longer fighting alone. Together, she and Ali would navigate what came next, one step at a time, for Gavin's sake and for their own. The late afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Elsa's apartment, casting a warm golden glow across the modest but cozy space. Gavin lay peacefully in his crib, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Elsa stood nearby, watching him with a mixture of love and quiet apprehension. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind, and though she had won the custody battle, the challenges of co-parenting with Ali were just beginning. The knock on her door broke her thoughts. She glanced at the clock, right on time. Taking a deep breath, she walked to the door and opened it to find Ali standing there. He held a small bag in one hand and a nervous smile on his face. "Hi," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I brought a few things for Gavin. Thought it might make the transition easier." Elsa stepped aside to let him in, her expression neutral. "Come in. He's still napping, but you can see him for a bit." Ali nodded and stepped into the apartment. He looked around, taking in the space that was so different from the grandiosity of the Whitmore estate. It was simple, filled with touches of warmth and personality that spoke of the life Elsa had created for herself and their son. He set the bag down by the crib and looked at Gavin, a soft smile spreading across his face. "He's so peaceful," Ali murmured. "I didn't think it was possible to love someone this much without even knowing them." Elsa watched him carefully, unsure how to respond. She wanted to believe the sincerity in his voice, but doubt lingered at the edges of her thoughts. "It's a lot," she said finally, "but it's worth it." Ali turned to her, his expression serious. "I want to help, Elsa. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to be here for him, for both of you." She crossed her arms, leaning against the edge of the couch. "Being here isn't enough, Ali. This isn't just about showing up when it's convenient. Gavin needs stability, consistency. He needs someone who won't leave when things get hard." "I won't," he said firmly, his voice filled with quiet determination. "I've spent too long running from my responsibilities, from my own mistakes. I'm done with that." Before Elsa could respond, Gavin stirred in his crib, letting out a small whimper. Both of them turned their attention to the baby, and Elsa moved instinctively to pick him up, cradling him against her chest. Ali watched her, his gaze softening. "Can I hold him?" he asked tentatively. Elsa hesitated, her arms tightening around Gavin for a moment. It wasn't that she didn't want Ali to hold his son, it was the vulnerability of the moment that made her pause. But as she looked at Ali, the nervous hope in his eyes, she found herself nodding. "Okay," she said softly, carefully transferring Gavin into Ali's waiting arms. "Support his head." Ali moved with caution, his movements tentative but gentle as he cradled Gavin. The baby blinked sleepily, his tiny fingers curling instinctively around the fabric of Ali's shirt. A look of awe crossed Ali's face as he held his son for the first time, the reality of it settling in. "He's so small," Ali murmured, his voice almost reverent. "But he feels solid, like he's already so much stronger than I could ever be." Elsa watched silently, her emotions warring within her. Seeing Ali like this, vulnerable, honest, and so clearly moved, stirred something in her that she wasn't ready to face. She busied herself with tidying the small table nearby, giving herself something to focus on other than the weight of the moment. "I've missed so much already," Ali continued, his voice tinged with regret. "His first cry, his first smile. I can't get those moments back, but I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere." Elsa turned back to him, her arms crossing protectively over her chest. "It's going to take more than just words, Ali. Gavin deserves a father who's here for the long haul. No disappearing acts, no half-hearted commitments." "You'll see," he said, looking up at her, his gaze steady. "I'll prove it to you, Elsa, to both of you." She wanted to believe him. A part of her even did. But trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt in a single afternoon. It would take time, patience, and effort, things she wasn't sure Ali could sustain. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang again. Cody stepped in moments later, his familiar easy smile lighting up the room. "Am I interrupting?" he asked, glancing between Elsa and Ali. "No," Elsa said quickly, taking Gavin back from Ali's arms. She pressed a kiss to her son's forehead as he settled against her shoulder. "Ali was just leaving." Ali's face fell slightly, but he nodded. "I'll come by again tomorrow," he said, directing his words to both Elsa and Gavin. "If that's okay." "We'll see," Elsa replied, her tone guarded. She didn't miss the tension in Cody's expression, but she chose not to address it now. Ali lingered for a moment, as if searching for something more to say, but eventually turned and left. As the door closed behind him, Cody stepped closer to Elsa, his hand resting lightly on her arm. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "I'm fine," she said, her voice calm but distant. "It's just a lot to take in." Cody nodded, his concern evident. "You know I'm here, right? Whatever you need, no matter what happens with him." "I know," she said, managing a small smile. "Thank you, Cody." As the evening wore on, Elsa found herself replaying the interaction in her mind. Ali had surprised her, not just with his words, but with the way he held Gavin, the way he seemed genuinely committed to being part of their lives. But doubt still lingered, and she couldn't shake the fear of letting him in, only to be hurt again. For now, all she could do was take it one day at a time, protecting Gavin and herself, while cautiously allowing Ali the chance to prove he could be the father their son deserved. The warm breeze of the Austin afternoon carried the laughter of children playing in the nearby park. Elsa stood by the edge of the playground, her eyes following Gavin as he toddled across the grass, his small hands outstretched in excitement. At only a little over a year old, he had an energy that seemed boundless, a constant reminder of the life and joy he brought to her world. Ali sat a few feet away on a bench, his gaze locked on their son, with a mixture of pride and tenderness. He had been making good on his promises over the past few months, showing up consistently, building a bond with Gavin, and proving to Elsa that his intentions were genuine. While the wounds of the past hadn't fully healed, there was a cautious peace between them now, an understanding forged through effort and time. Cody arrived moments later, holding 2 cups of iced coffee and flashing his usual easy smile. "You're going to need this," he teased, handing one to Elsa. "That kid has more energy than the rest of us combined." Elsa chuckled, accepting the cup. "Tell me about it. I don't know where he gets it." "Probably you," Cody replied, his tone light but affectionate. He glanced at Ali, giving him a small nod of acknowledgement before turning his attention back to Gavin. It had taken time for Cody to accept Ali's re-entry into Elsa's life. At first, the tension between them had been palpable, but as Ali's commitment became clear, Cody had softened, recognizing that this wasn't about their differences. It was about what was best for Gavin. While Cody's feelings for Elsa remained steadfast, he respected the boundaries she had set, choosing to support her in whatever way she needed. As Gavin stumbled and fell onto the grass, a startled cry escaped him. Elsa moved instinctively, but Ali was already there, scooping Gavin up with practiced ease. "You're okay, buddy," he murmured, brushing dirt off the toddler's pants. Gavin sniffled but quickly calmed, his small arms wrapping around Ali's neck. Elsa watched the scene unfold, her heart tightening in a way she hadn't expected. Ali's growth as a father was undeniable, and seeing him care for their son so naturally stirred something in her, a fragile hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" Cody's voice broke through her thoughts, gentle but knowing. "About what?" Elsa asked, feigning ignorance. "Letting him back in," Cody said, his eyes steady. "Not just as Gavin's dad, but in your life." Elsa didn't answer immediately, her gaze fixed on Ali as he guided Gavin back toward the playground. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "Part of me wants to, but it's not that simple." "It never is," Cody said, his voice soft. "But whatever you decide, just make sure it's what you want, not what you think you owe him, or Gavin, or anyone else." Elsa nodded, appreciating his honesty. As much as she valued Cody's support, she knew the decision ahead was one she had to make on her own. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the park in shades of gold and amber. Elsa sat down on the bench, letting the breeze tousle her hair as she watched Gavin toddle toward Ali, who crouched with his arms wide open. The sound of their laughter filled the air, tugging at something deep within her. For so long, she had built walls around herself to protect her heart, to guard Gavin from the pain she had endured. But now, those walls felt less like fortresses and more like barriers she wasn't sure she needed anymore. Ali carried Gavin back to the bench, settling the little boy onto Elsa's lap. "He's got your energy," Ali said with a soft smile, his tone warm but not overbearing. Elsa smiled back, brushing a strand of hair from Gavin's face. "He's definitely got your stubbornness," she replied, the hint of a tease in her voice. For a moment, silence fell between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that spoke volumes without a single word. Ali broke it first, his voice quieter now. "Elsa, I know I've said it before, but thank you for giving me the chance to be here, to be part of his life." Elsa looked up, her green eyes meeting his. "You've earned it, Ali. You've shown up, and you've stayed. That's more than I thought you would ever do." "I'll keep showing up," he said firmly, his voice steady. "For him. For you, if you'll let me." Her chest tightened at the sincerity in his words. There was a time when she would have jumped at the chance to hear those words from him. But now the stakes were different. She wasn't just thinking about herself. She was thinking about Gavin, about the life she wanted for him, about the stability and love he deserved. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's still a lot of hurt, Ali. And trust. Trust takes time." "I know," he said, "and I'll wait. As long as it takes, I'll wait." Gavin stirred in her lap, reaching up to pat her cheek with his tiny hand. The simple gesture brought a smile to her lips, and she kissed the top of his head, feeling the warmth of his presence anchor her. Maybe it wasn't about deciding everything at once. Maybe it was about taking small steps, one day at a time. Cody walked over carrying Gavin's favourite stuffed toy, which had fallen during their earlier play. He handed it to Elsa with a smile that was kind, but tinged with a quiet understanding. "You've got a good team here," he said softly, glancing between her and Ali. "Whatever happens, just remember that." Elsa nodded, her eyes lingering on both men. Cody, with his steady presence and unwavering support, had been her rock during the hardest times. And Ali, flawed but undeniably trying, was proving that he could be the father Gavin needed and the partner she once thought he could be. As the evening settled in, they packed up and headed toward their cars. Ali stood by his car, hesitating as if there was more he wanted to say, but instead he simply smiled at Gavin, giving him a small wave. "See you soon, buddy," he said, his voice filled with warmth. Elsa strapped Gavin into his car seat, glancing back at Ali one last time. "Thank you for today," she said quietly. "It meant a lot." "It meant everything to me," Ali replied. Driving home, Elsa felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. She glanced at Gavin in the rearview mirror, his little face peaceful as he dozed off. He was her anchor, her reason for fighting, her reminder that even in the face of heartbreak, there was always the possibility of healing. As the lights of her apartment came into view, Elsa made a quiet promise to herself, to take each day as it came, to let trust rebuild where it could, and to give Gavin the life he deserved, surrounded by love, whether that included Ali, Cody, or just her and her son. She didn't need all the answers now. She just needed to keep moving forward. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and as she placed Gavin in his crib, a single tear slipped down her cheek, not of sadness, but of hope. The past no longer defined her, and the future, while unwritten, held the promise of something beautiful. And for Elsa Harper, that was enough.